were underage. We were little girls.
I was 16.
I was 16.
I started going to him when I was like 14 turning 15. By the time I was 16, I brought him up to 75 girls, all the ages of, 14, 15, 16, people going from 8th grade to 9th grade at just school parties is where I would recruit him from.
All Jeffrey cared about was go find me more girls. His appetite was insatiable. He couldn't stop. He wanted new, fresh, young faces every single day.
He needs to be behind bars. He needs to be behind bars for the rest of his life. There is way too many girls for him not to be. That's just mind-blowing.
Those are just a few stories from the more than 80 alleged victims of serial child molester Jeffrey Epstein, left voiceless by the U.S. justice system. Now, some lawmakers are demanding an investigation into the Department of Justice's extremely lenient deal for Epstein in 2007. The case has gained renewed interest after the Miami Herald reported that federal prosecutors, led by then U.S. Attorney and now Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, entered into a secret deal with Epstein that allowed him to spend just 13 months in county jail when they had enough evidence to put him away for life. Yesterday, Senator Ben Sasse fired off a series of letters, including one to the Inspector General of the Justice Department, calling Epstein a monster and writing that the, quote, pathetically soft sentence is a travesty that should outrage us all. Joining us now is the investigative reporter behind the Miami Herald expose, Julie Brown. Julie, good morning. Thank you for being with us. This is just an extraordinary string of reporting from you and your team at the Miami Herald. People can read it on the website. But I just want to lay out some facts for people who sort of just tuning into this story. The FBI in that indictment listed the accounts of 32 women, but you found more than 80 women. Tell us about some of the digging you did to get their stories.
Well, this case has been around for many years. A lot of reporters have followed it and done some very good work on this. But it is now a decade later, and after Alex Acosta got nominated as Labor Secretary, I remembered this case, and I thought, where are these girls now? Now they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and I wonder what they think, quite frankly, about this, and how did this affect them? And so I decided the only way all their names were all secret, of course, because they were minors at the time. So I had to really dig through a lot of court files in the hopes of finding clues on who these women are now today. So it did take me quite a few months to get a list of names together. And I wanted to find out exactly, how their lives have gone and what they thought. I mean, when you're adult women, you think of things a lot differently than when you're 14 years old when this happened. And, of course, I found a few. I tracked down many of them. They didn't want to talk, most of them, but I did find a few that were willing to talk. And they really felt betrayed by Alex Acosta, who was the Miami prosecutor at the time who signed off on this lenient plea deal.
So, Julie, there's a 53-page indictment that the FBI helped put together. Prosecutors certainly felt like they'd made their case with all that testimony. So many of their stories from these young women, girls, let's call them what they were at the time, girls, lined up. They told a version of the same story. So how did this plea deal happen? Take us inside Alex Acosta and the deal he made with Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, this case, from the very beginning, the police were the only people, the Palm Beach police were the only people that were really on the girls' side, so to speak. They were trying to convince first the state prosecutor to prosecute him, and that failed. And then they took it to the FBI, and finally it ended up under Alex Acosta's purview. And he had worked for a pretty a big law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, and what Epstein did shrewdly was hire a bunch of attorneys with ties to that law firm, Kenneth Starr, Jay Lefkowitz, a couple other people who were pretty powerful, shrewd lawyers who also had connections to the Bush administration, which was in office at the time that this deal happened. So these lawyers really put a lot of pressure on Acosta, who was a Republican at the time, and still is, and it became increasingly clear that he had to make a tough decision whether he was going to go with prosecuting Epstein despite all this pressure, or cutting a deal, which is eventually what he did.
So, Julie, first of all, congratulations on this report, and it's one of the reasons that newspapers have to remain in existence and getting stronger each and every day due to work, partly from work like you have given us. But let me ask you, from your thumbnail description of what just happened between local authorities in Palm Beach County and even in Miami, is it the case that basically money talked here, that Epstein went out and hired a bunch of really highly skilled lawyers from a big, powerful law firm, and the local authorities at the local level in confronting what is now a federal case were just outgunned legally?
Yes, they were definitely outgunned. But also, I think that the prosecutors, both state and federal prosecutors, were they were kind of enamored by these big name attorneys. Remember, it was Alan Dershowitz too. I mean, Alan Dershowitz was the first lawyer that he hired, and he was, he flew down to Palm Beach. He met with all these people. I had one prosecutor who was involved in the case tell me that he remembers sitting in a room with all these lawyers and thinking, wow, there's, hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting here at the table with me. So they were pretty, enamored by these lawyers, and the emails and the correspondence between prosecutors and these lawyers showed how enamored they were. They were very amicable and cordial, and it's not like they were going after them and saying, well, here's what they were really trying to work with them from the very beginning.
And didn't one of the girls identify Alan Dershowitz in your story?
Yes, she has been on court record as identifying Mr. Dershowitz as being one of the people that she was directed to have sex with by Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, Mr. Dershowitz has denied that he was ever involved, that he ever met her, but she has been standing by that story.
And what is that story?
Well, while she was, with Epstein, that there was many powerful people that he directed her to have sex with. And her story is that he did this in order to gain leverage over some powerful people.
Right, but specifically Alan Dershowitz. What was her claim against Alan Dershowitz?
That she had sex with, she had been directed to have sex with him several times when she was 16. She was underage.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the local knowledge of this case. I can tell you in New York, we had heard from time to time, even at the beginning of this campaign, of Jeffrey Epstein flying around with very powerful people, and talk of, quote, Orgy Island, where he would fly very powerful people to an island to have sex with underage women or perhaps very young women who may have been of age. Was it common knowledge in Palm Beach as well that he was conducting the same type of illegal behavior there?
No, in fact, I think it kind of went under the radar because the police were pretty surprised when they realized how extensive it was. Because remember, he had these young girls going into his mansion like 2-3 times a day. It was like a revolving door. And when police first discovered it, they were pretty shocked. They thought,
did you talk to neighbors who noticed that young underage girls were constantly going into this creep's mansion?
Yeah, but remember, this is a pretty leafy neighborhood with a lot of palm trees, and he has a big gate and a fence in front of his house. So, these girls would come in a taxi and go through the gates, and I'm not sure how much, it's not like they were walking down the street or anything. So I'm not sure how much the neighbors would have really been able to see.
Based on your reporting, based on your knowledge of this case, are there a lot of very powerful, very well-known men, both Republican and Democratic politicians and power brokers, who would fear this case being in open court?
Well, it's hard to say. These rumors have been going around for a while. I think that there are a lot of powerful, influential people who, if they weren't involved in this, they knew it was happening.
Who were some of his powerful and influential friends, people that traveled with him that you know of?
Well, it was, President Clinton. He had been on his plane, dozens of times, including with the Secret Service. There were actors, Kevin Spacey. There were world leaders, former prime ministers. He had a lot of powerful people.
What former prime ministers?
Barak. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he had been friends with him for a while. Other than that, you know, he also had been donating a lot of money to people like Bill Richardson and other politically active or elected people.
Yeah, Julie, let me just follow up on one of the things Joe's asking, just to get kind of to make this as pointed as possible. I mean, it's the case that when the 2016 campaign was getting going, there was knowledge of the thing you just mentioned about President Clinton, that President Clinton had taken a lot of plane flights with Jeffrey Epstein, and there was a lot of discussion in the political world about the possibility that if there was exposure of those flights and what might have happened when he was spending time with Jeffrey Epstein on his island, that might be a problem for Hillary Clinton. At the same time, Jeffrey Epstein also a good, long social friend of Donald Trump, someone he spent a lot of time with. So I'm curious, just in a very specific way, whether you think that those relationships, and you mentioned a bunch of other ones, but I'm mostly focused on these two because we ended up with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as the nominees of their parties in 2016, whether those relationships in some way affected the disposition of this case, whether there was a way in which the political connections that Jeffrey Epstein had was part of what went into, on the basis of your reporting, part of what went into the fact that he got such a sweetheart deal and was able to evade spending a lot of time in prison.
You know, I think that's the biggest mystery about this whole thing. I don't think anybody really has connected all the dots completely. I mean, I certainly attempted to. But at some point, I thought the real story is the criminal justice system and how it failed these girls. And I tried to stay focused on that because I didn't think, quite frankly, I'd really get to the bottom of exactly why Alex Acosta did what he did, except for monetary reasons, because this man had a lot of power and a lot of money.
Well, and Willie also... no depositions taken by people that flew on his plane. No depositions by people who were social friends of his. No depositions about what happened on the island. No depositions from prime ministers or former presidents or powerful media figures or powerful New York real estate tycoons.
Well, in Epstein's latest settlement, which just happened in the last couple of days, assures that many of these women that we're hearing about, thanks to Julie and her reporting team, won't be heard in court. We won't hear their stories in court. Julie, let me just follow up on what Joe and John have been asking you, and just be very specific about it. Did any of the women you spoke to, and there were more than 80, make any specific claim about either President Trump or President Clinton?
No. I think what I've been telling people, because of course I'm getting a lot of feedback about the story. Well, what about Clinton? What about Trump? You know, why didn't you report this? And you know, here's the reality: sexual abuse doesn't discriminate based on political party. There were a lot of people that knew about this and were involved in it, who on both sides of the aisle, I believe, and they all, to some degree, protect each other.
Investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, Julie Brown, thank you for bringing this back to public attention and giving it such a platform. We'll certainly stay on it, and we follow your lead. Thanks, Julie.
And you know, Ben Sasse is right. Thank you so much, Julie. And the Miami Herald, God, what great work.
Yeah.
But Ben Sasse is exactly right. The Justice Department needs to blow this case wide open. They need to do it in public. Jackie, this is extraordinary. The number 60, 70. 80 underage girls, and you had the federal government calling a 14-year-old sexual abuse victim a, quote, prostitute?
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, incredible, and important reporting. I think it definitely disqualifies Alexander Acosta's chances at becoming the Attorney General. And, you know, another thing on this, if Donald Trump is draining the swamp in any way, he's now inadvertently doing so in a way he probably didn't anticipate by, you know, bringing people like Alexander Acosta and these tangential connections to the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world, and dredging up these important stories. And hopefully these women will see some justice.
John?
It's an ugly, ugly story, and I think, you know, it surprised me that given the level of rumors that were around, given the demonstrated connections. These are factual things. President Clinton flew on Jeffrey Epstein's plane a lot. Donald Trump was a social friend of Jeffrey Epstein's for years. I think we all experienced as we headed into 2016, there was a sense that this story could become an explosive thing that could have negative implications for those two candidacies, Hillary Clinton's candidacy and Donald Trump's, and then it never happened. And I think one of the things here, although Julie says she's not gotten to the bottom of exactly how the story unfolded, one of the long-term questions here, this man was a monster, and he spent a lot of time with a lot of powerful people. There are a lot of questions still to be answered, and I think one of the central ones is, how is it that this story that seemed like it was about to bubble over right before the 2016 campaign, why did it not? And what were the unseen forces that were keeping this thing undercover?
I remember you telling me in July or August of 2015 on this set that you believed that this was going to be a story that would explode in the campaign, and it never did.
Yeah.
It never did. One deal after another deal until the Miami Herald dug deep.